Part 3. The screecher sits near the base of the blue willow. She senses movement. Someone is coming. Her head turns. She sees something. An animal with long, red head, fur, and 4 appendages. The red-furred animal takes a step forward. Her scent is familiar, but how could that possibly be? And is she safe? Thwop! The attachment on the screecher's rear end strikes the ground. She is not sure why. It seems to have a mind of its own. A pungent aroma fills the air. It is full of worry and warning. But the red-furred animal is still coming. She moves awkwardly, but there is something gentle about her, too. What to do? Run? Hide? Stay perfectly still? Is this what it's like to be alive? Will the screecher ever know everything she needs to know? Will she always be torn between hope and fear? Why is this happening? What curious magic has brought her to this moment? Chapter 20. I didn't dare move. I couldn't bear to be frighten the trembling animal away. The familiar scent of scared screecher wafted my way. I glanced right and left. The square was deserted, save for a lurk-monk who chittered in annoyance at the smell and ran for the safety of a nearby thicket. Behind me, down toward the river, villagers were setting up stalls to sell their wares for the fair. Ever hopeful, before me sat a baby screecher. My coat was lying on the ground nearby. Even from here I could see that the pocket was empty. I had always been a practical sort. I did not believe in magic, in spells, in things that defied logic. As it was, nature provided plenty of mystery. I inched closer. The baby screecher's eyes were huge with fear. It was roughly the same size as the puzzler Connor had given me. It was in roughly the same place that I'd left the puzzler, and the puzzler seemed to be gone. But it was a huge leap, a giant chasm of a leap. To think that one thing had turned into the other. That was not how nature worked. Baby screechers didn't just suddenly appear out of thin air. It was a female, I decided, based on her small snout and narrow chest. Clearly, she had wandered here from the woods. It was a bizarre coincidence, that's all it was. The screecher made a squeaky noise. A warning to me, perhaps. It was all I could do not to laugh. I had seen baby screechers before, that time with my pa, and a couple of years back. I'd even caught a glimpse of a ma screecher with 4 newborns. I'd backed away lightning quick. I knew the last thing the ma needed right then was a human intruder. Even when they were young, I had to admit the screechers were odd-looking animals, and this one was no exception. Still, when she tried to take a step and tumbled onto her tail, it was awfully charming. Her tusks weren't much to look at. Her tail bristles seemed more delicate than threatening. But I knew she was meant to grow into something fearsome. Where could she have come from? There weren't any nests nearby. I would have seen them, or Connor would have. Perhaps a hunter had killed its ma. Maybe the baby had wandered down from the hills, somehow surviving. It was incredibly unlikely, but there had to be an explanation. Poor thing. I took another step, and she gave what was supposed to be a fierce growl, like a crabby kitten, and then she whacked her tail again. It didn't have much effect. The air smelled as bad as it was going to get. Given her size, I couldn't leave her there, or here. She'd be dead by nightfall. I thought of Otwal Boron and shuddered. I knelt down, looked away, and backed up to show I wasn't a threat. The screecher seemed to calm a bit. Slowly, I kept moving away. The baby busied herself licking her tail. I circled around until I was on the far side of the carousel, mostly hidden by the legs of the wooden animals. The screecher's ears pricked up. One of them had a notch in it, just like Connor's puzzler. I couldn't think about that now. She had a reed bow tied around her neck, just like Connor's puzzler. But I couldn't think about that either. The baby could hear me moving as I reached up to pull my coat off the blue unicorn. But she seemed to be distracted by the desire to make her 4 legs work together. I would only have one chance. Deep breath. I took a flying leap off the carousel, stretched out my arms, and trapped the baby screecher under my coat. If she'd been any bigger, her shrieks of outrage would have been deafening. Chapter 21. While she struggled and squeaked, I wrapped her up as best I could. I reminded myself that even though she was young, her tail quills might hurt me. I'd heard the quills of an adult screecher caused a miserable sting and took forever to remove. I held her close to my chest. "Shh," I said. "Hush, little one. You'll be all right." I didn't want to squeeze too hard, didn't want to crush the terrified baby or prevent her from getting enough air. But I also wanted to keep her quiet enough for me to sneak through the village center and make my way back to May and Bertie's cottage. I could try to cut through the woods, but around here they were thick with briar bushes. I'd have a hard time getting through, even without having to hold a squirmy baby. On the other hand, once again I bore screecher perfume, which would make it difficult for me to pass unnoticed. "Shh," now I whispered. "We're going to find a safe place for you." Even as I said the words, I realized I had no idea where that would be. What would I feed the baby? Would it need mother's milk? What if there was a nest hidden away somewhere with more babies, or an injured adult? Nothing I could do about it now. Something scratched my arm, and I realized it was the screecher's claws. They'd pierced right through my coat. Not much of a mark, but still, it made me realize how powerful adult claws must be. I began to walk, humming softly, and made it was the rhythmic movement of my off-key tune, but the baby seemed to relax. I stayed away from the riverfront, where most of the activity was, and I kept to the back path. But I passed several villagers, a few of whom I recognized from the council meeting. "Look," an old man said, "it's the Screecher girl." "She certainly smells the part," said his companion. I kept my gaze straight ahead, clutched my coat, and moved as fast as I could, ignoring the occasional taunts or eye rolls. As I approached the lane leading to the cottage, I glanced down at the riverfront. The blue willows spiraled in the brisk, warm wind, and I saw no humming-bears. I did, however, see Connor. He was hammering a wooden stall into place. A stack of his humming-bear puzzlers sat nearby in a large willow basket. Quickly I averted my gaze, but not before he noticed me. "Willodeen!" he yelled. "Wait!" "I'm in a hurry," I called over my shoulder. He grabbed the basket and ran to catch up with me, even as I increased my pace. "Wait!" he repeated. "I want to explain." A moment later, Connor had joined me, moving in tandem with my stride. He was breathless, his face anxious. "I should have spoken up at the meeting," he said. "Defended you." "Why?" I asked. "It's not like it would have mattered." "Because I agreed with you, but my father is—" I knew he'd be embarrassed if I— Connor paused, sniffling the air. "I could swear I smell a screecher." I said, holding my coat tighter. I wanted to show him what I'd found, but my confusion about the screecher's origins made me wary. Could I trust Connor? Would he tell his father? Already I felt strangely protective about the baby, the way I supposed a parent must feel about a child. The road narrowed and grew steeper, and our pace slowed a bit. The baby let out a noise. That sounded like a squirrel's squeak. It was hard to ignore. Connor frowned. "What was that?" Just me," I coughed loudly. "Might be catching, you'd best be on your way." "But—" I stopped. "Connor, it's all fine, really. There was no point in you speaking up at the council meeting, because there was no point in my speaking up. Nobody cares about screechers. It's the hummingbears they're worried about, and I understand that, I do. But ouch!" The baby had poked its claws into my neck. I loosened my grip just a tad, and out popped her little screecher head, comical tusks and all. Apparently she'd had quite enough of my company. She wiggled free, dropped to the ground with a squeal, and took off running. It seemed she'd figured out how to use those feet after all. Chapter 22. The baby scrambled up the road with surprising speed. "It's a screecher," Connor said. "We have to catch it," I yelled, already running. "Or they will!" I didn't have to tell Connor who they were. The screecher still hadn't quite grasped the art of running. Her legs got tangled quickly. She dashed, tripped, landed on her rear, or sometimes her snout, then dashed off some more. Back and forth across the road she darted in a random zigzag. Other than a cottage or two, thick woods edged up against both sides of the road. I kept waiting for the baby to disappear into the underbrush. Instinct would urge her there, I thought. But she seemed too overwhelmed to know what to do, which was a good thing for us. Connor dumped out his basket of hummingbird puzzlers, then bounded ahead. In a flash, he was on one far side of the baby, planted solidly in the middle of the road with his empty basket at the ready. The screecher caught sight of him. She paused, glanced behind her, and there I was, my coat held wide open. "She'll head into the trees," I called. "Try not to scare her." Connor's look said I was stating the obvious. The screecher squeaked, circled, reared up on her hind legs, and toppled onto her side. Poor thing, she was so confused, so lost. I met Connor's eyes, and he nodded. I held up one finger, then two, and on three, we ran for her. She bolted, heading to my right toward a tangle of sunberry bushes, but Connor and I were faster. Connor dropped his basket over her carefully. We slid my coat under the overturned basket and then upended it. Once again she was trapped. Connor and I looked at each other, breathless, dirty, sprawled in the road. "Good work," I said, brushing my hair out of my eyes. "Where did you find it?" Connor asked. "Down by the carousel. I left my coat behind, and then when I went back, she was just sitting there." Connor peeked under my coat. The baby attempted a winsome snarl. "Willodeen," he said. "Its neck." I rubbed the spot where the baby had poked me. "It's nothing. I'll get it cleaned back at the cottage." "No, not your neck. Its neck." He seemed frustrated. "Did you see that's what's around its neck?" I didn't answer. "A sweetgrass reed." I waited for more. "A sweetgrass reed tied in a bow." I looked at my shoes. "The screecher I gave you had a sweetgrass reed tied in a bow around its neck." I swallowed. The baby screecher skittered back and forth in the basket. "Did you put that bow on the baby?" "No," I said. "Maybe it got tangled in some reeds, or maybe someone did it as a prank, or—" I was out of ideas. I suppose Connor patted the pockets of my coat. "Where's the puzzler I gave you?" he asked. Not exactly sure." Connor frowned. "You mean it's gone?" I hoped that if I said the words quickly enough, they wouldn't sound so absurd. "I accidentally left my coat on the carousel. You know, the blue unicorn. Well, that's where I left it. And then I went back to get it, and the puzzler was gone, and there was this baby on the ground with a bow on my pocket, and my pocket was empty, and really, that's all I know." Connor stared at the basket. Then he stared at me. I didn't say the other thing I knew, that the baby screecher had a notch in its ear, that my own tears had made a similar nick in Connor's puzzler. I didn't say it because I couldn't believe it myself. I couldn't let myself believe there was any connection. "We should go back," I said, pointing down the hill. "All your hummingbird puzzlers are there." "That's the least of our problems," Connor said, with a weary smile. The baby squeaked. She did not sound happy. "Let's go see May and Bertie," I suggested. "They'll know what to do." I wondered if Connor could hear the doubt in my voice. Chapter 23. May and Bertie did not seem particularly surprised to find a basket containing a baby screecher arriving at the door. Strangely enough, the baby screecher didn't seem particularly surprised either. We placed the basket before the hearth. It was warm in the cottage, but Bertie lit a fire anyway. Even after I slid my coat off the top of the basket, the baby sat calmly peering up at us with her vigilant green eyes rimmed in yellow. Perhaps she had used all her energy trying to run away, or maybe she found the crackling fire calming. Duzu seemed fascinated by our new addition. He hopped over to Connor, fluttered up to his shoulder, and gazed down at the baby, cooing questions. Gently as I could, I slipped the sweetgrass reed over the screecher's head. She grumbled unconvincingly. I passed the bow to Connor. He examined it, slowly shaking his head. "Poor wee thing," said May. "Must be scared to death." Bertie set a saucer of water in front of the baby. The screecher lapped it up eagerly. "So, is there a reason we have this visitor?" Bertie asked as we refilled the saucer. I hesitated, but only for a second. I knew we were going to share the whole story with May and Bertie. They were probably the only people in the world we could tell without being laughed at or locked away, and at least the baby would be safe here. I recounted what had happened, with some help from Connor. The screecher's appearance on the carousel, my empty coat pocket, the attempted escape, the reed tied around its neck. Connor held up the bow. "It has to be the same one," he murmured. He looked from May to Bertie and back again. "Doesn't it?" May settled in the rocker near the basket. "What were you doing before he appeared, Willodeen?" She squinted at the baby. "Or is he a she?" "A she, I'm pretty sure," I said. "She'll be needing a name, then," Bertie pointed out. May held up her hand. "First thing is first." "Bird, what was happening before you found her, Willodeen?" "I went to the council meeting with Connor." "She spoke up too," said Connor. I was surprised to hear something in his voice that sounded like pride. Bertie clapped her hands together. "Brava!" she cried. "Did you unburden yourself? Make your case?" "Oh, I unburdened all right. I really didn't want to go into the details. And then I went outside, and I sat down, and I—" "Did you cry?" May asked. She actually looked hopeful. "I guess so. Yes, I was mad." "Aha! Angry tears," May declared with a triumphant smile. She nodded at Bertie. "That's got to be it." "Without a doubt," Bertie agreed. "Angry tears have magic in them," May explained to Connor, but he didn't appear to need convincing. "That would explain it," he said, cradling Duzu in the crook of his arm. I shot him a glance to see if he was making fun, but no, Connor seemed to be in complete agreement. "You can't be serious," I said, rubbing my eyes. "All three of you actually believe this?" May put her hand near her mouth and said, in a stage whisper, "Willodeen doesn't believe in magic." Connor looked disappointed. "Really? Is that true?" "Of course it's true," I said. "You do?" "I believe there are things we don't understand," he said. "That doesn't mean magic exists," I replied. "There's magic in all of us," Bertie said. "Just a bit. You're born with it, like fingers and toes and fuzzy baby hair. Some of us make use of it, and some do not." We sat in silence for a few minutes, the only sound coming from the shifting logs in the fire and Duzu's occasional questioning coos. Bertie gave the baby more water. "I wonder how she got that notch in her right ear," she mused. I cleared my throat. I looked at Connor and Bertie and May, all three of them ready, apparently, to believe anything about the creature in our midst. I sighed. Then I told them about my tears, and about the nick they'd made in Connor's puzzler. We all gazed down at the baby, as if her ear held the answer to the world's most pressing questions. "I believe," May said at last, "that you have just proved our point, Willodeen, dear." Before I could respond, the baby let loose a pitiful cry. "We can debate this another day," said Bertie. "Magic or not, right now we've got ourselves a hungry baby screecher, and nothing at all to feed it." Chapter 24. I consulted my notebooks and tried to remember everything Pa had ever told me about screechers. Then I made a list of any food I thought they might eat, while Bertie cleaned the scratch on my neck with a cloth soaked in one of her horrible-smelling salves. It wasn't a very appetizing list. Worms, grubs, dillybugs, slugs, peacocks, snails, pink mushrooms, aspen twigs, sun ferns. I didn't know where to start. "She's so young," I said. "I suppose she might still need mother's milk." Bertie sighed. "I've not a clue." "Nor I," said May. "I've seen screechers rooting near blue willows and berry bushes," Connor offered. "Come to think of it, I've even seen them digging through trash bins in the village." "Some animals will only eat a few things," I said. "Hummingbirds are known for being picky. They like aphids, flies, and blue willow leaves, and that's about it." "The one in our home is definitely the exception to that rule," said May, leveling a finger at Duzu. "I'm talking to you, cake stealer." "I just don't know where to start," I said. "You probably know more about screechers than the rest of the village put together, Willodeen," Connor said. I reached out my right index finger toward the baby, hoping to scratch the top of her head. She looked so hopeful and so helpless. The baby promptly bit my finger. "Ouch!" I cried. She didn't break my skin, but I was going to have to be careful of her sharp baby teeth and those twisting tusks. She looked quite proud of herself, and not nearly so helpless. "And though she be but little, she is fierce," said May. "Shakespeare, A Midsummer's Night's Dream." Bertie sighed. "Remember the production in Somerset? What a superb Titiana you were." "Bird, you were too kind." May waved a hand. "But we digress. What might we feed our new arrival?" "You've both come up with recipes before," I said. "Remember the baby hedgehog we found, and that abandoned tiger-fox pup? Maybe you could come up with something for a screecher." "Well, it couldn't hurt to try," said May. Connor shifted uncomfortably. "I really should go. My father will be wondering where I am." "Will he be mad?" I asked. "He doesn't get mad," Connor smiled. "He gets disappointed." "Don't you worry, Connor," said May. "We'll take good care of the wee one." "Your puzzlers!" I exclaimed. "You'll need your basket." "Puzzlers?" Bertie repeated. "We left Connor's humming-bear sculptures on the side of the road. We needed his basket to capture the baby." "You can use that wooden crate in the kitchen for a bed," said Bertie. "The one with the potatoes and the turnips in it." I emptied the crate, and May gave me an old quilt to line it. Connor and I tilted his basket over the crate, and the baby slid out like a sledder on a snowy hill. To my surprise, she didn't seem at all annoyed. "I think she actually enjoyed that," Connor said, laughing. Bertie tapped her finger on her chin. "You know, she does need a name." I looked at Connor. My mind was blank. He thought for a moment. "She seems like a Quinby to me." "Quinby?" I said. "I had a dog named Quinby once. Used to howl at the night like a coyote. Or a screecher." I leaned toward the basket. "Quinby," I whispered. She responded with a squeaky noise. I can't say that it was a pleasant noise, but I took it to be a good sign. "All right, Duzu," I said. "Say goodbye to Connor." "Off you go, Duzu," Connor said, nudging him over to my shoulder. "Good luck with your father," I said. "Good luck with your screecher," he said. I knew we would need luck. Luck, skill, maybe even a bit of magic. Chapter 25. The next 2 days were a blur of mixing, cutting, hunting, and a whole lot of guessing as we tried to coax Quinby to eat. Our first concoction included 1 mealworm, a piece of fern, 2 sunberries, and pinches of salt and sugar. May and Bertie mashed it all up with a mortar and a pestle and added a bit of warm water, and then it was my turn. I dipped a scrap of fabric into the awful-looking mess, then squeezed out droplets. Aiming for Quinby's mouth, Pa and I had done something similar with an abandoned baby whist bird we'd nursed back to health. That nestling had opened his beak so wide he could have swallowed the very egg he'd pecked his way out of. He had been easy to feed. Quinby, unfortunately, was not. She let the mixture drip into her snout. Then she shook her head and grumbled at me. "Could be she's ready for solid food," I said. "Some critters wean quickly." Next, we tried all manner of bugs and vegetation. We cut everything into pieces, set a plate in front of Quinby, and stepped back, watching and hoping. Quinby sniffed once, twice, then backed away, as if we'd deeply offended her. "She's shivering," I said, as I removed the plate. We'd already tried to cover her with maize quilt, but Quinby had shaken it off. May provided another one of her shawls, and I created a cozy nest for Quinby. That, at least, she seemed to appreciate. "I'm worried," I told Bertie and May as we sipped hot peppermint tea at the kitchen table. "What if she won't eat? What if she just wastes away?" "If anyone knows screechers, it's you," Bertie said. "You'll figure it out." "I don't know anything about magic screechers," I said. "Expect they eat the same as the regular ones," said May. I sat at the kitchen table, poring over my notebooks, looking for hints about screechers' behaviors I might have missed. Each entry brought back a memory, the way a familiar smell can instantly transport you to another place and time. 3.5 years ago, I'd watched 2 screechers eat a purple toadlet. Peacock snails came up frequently in my notes. Year after year, but they were difficult to find these days. The autumn before last, I'd seen 2 adult screechers eating spotted oak moths. Well, there was nothing to do but keep trying. I heaved a sigh. Since we'd captured Quinby, I hadn't seen Connor. I hoped he hadn't gotten into any trouble with his father about the puzzlers, or about spending time with me. Truth was, it would have been useful to have Connor's help me forage for Quinby's food. Not that I wanted his company, exactly, but an extra pair of hands digging for worms wouldn't have been the worst thing in the world. "I'm going out to look again," I announced. "We'll keep an eye on Quinby," said May. "Good hunting." "It's heading toward twilight," said Bertie. "Best take a lantern." "I'll be back before dark, Bertie." Bertie clucked her tongue. "Stubborn as the day is long," she said, and we both smiled. How many times since I'd moved in had she uttered those same words to me? Still remembering how I'd needed to borrow Connor's lantern, I relented and grabbed one. Duzu noticed me donning my coat and made his questioning noise. Normally, he would have fluttered over to my shoulder, anxious to go outside, but since Quinby's arrival, he'd spent all his time perched on a chair near the crate, like a worried big brother. "Good luck," May called, and Duzu sent me a soft, encouraging coo. It was another strange day of autumn weather. The dragon sighs were strong, whipping past in sudden bursts, and it was so warm I considered removing my coat. I kicked through piles of crisp brown leaves and savored the sound. All the while, I kept my eyes open for bugs or greens that might appeal to a hungry baby screecher. I headed up the road. Connor had mentioned a small stand of blue willows up that way, and I thought I might find something there. Like him, I'd seen screechers digging near blue willow roots now and then. There were 2 other spots where I'd found screechers nesting in the past, and I planned to check those areas too. I removed my notebook from my waist pouch to make certain I remembered the precise locations. As I thumbed through the pages, I heard someone call my name. It was Connor, and he was with his father. My first instinct was to duck into the bushes. I wasn't exactly sure why, but after my performance at the council meeting, I had a feeling Mr. Burke might best be avoided. "Willodeen!" Connor yelled. "Up here!" Apparently hiding was not an option. I took a deep breath, and up the hill I went. Chapter 26. "Father, this is Willodeen," Connor said as I neared. "Ah, yes, from the council meeting," said Mr. Burke. I expected a mocking tone, but didn't hear one, so I made myself meet his eyes. To my surprise, his gaze was thoughtful, maybe even kind. Somehow, close up, he looked tired and weathered, less intimidating than he had at the meeting. I could see Connor in him, and him in Connor. Connor rubbed the back of his neck. "How is everything?" "Fine," I answered, and I was relieved we both seemed to understand there would be no talk of Quinby in front of his father. I pointed to the paper Connor was holding. "What's that?" "A map," he said. "They're thinking about expanding the rail route." Father and I came up to get a better look at things. Below us, village lights glowed in the shadow of the hills as twilight descended. From this height, perchance seemed puny and fragile, as delicate as one of Connor's puzzlers. "They're proposing a cut through Sutton's Ridge," Mr. Burke pointed northeast. "It would bring the railroad closer to the river and the mill." We were buffeted by a fresh gust of wind. The trees shivered, our coats ballooned, and the map nearly flew out of Connor's hands. "Dragon sighs are fierce this year," Connor said, struggling to fold the map. "Last time they were like this was, 2 years back?" Mr. Burke asked. "That's when we had the Round Top Ridge fire, the one that started up near the tracks." As if on cue, a steam engine chugged through the hills just west of us. We could see its dark, confident body, its steamy breath, as it braked to a slow halt. Red sparks sprayed. "At the meeting," I said, and then I paused, suddenly self-conscious. That man, Mr. Williams, I think, said something about the railroad and the fires." "They've cleared brush near the tracks, best as I can, I'm told," said Mr. Burke. "Only so much we can do, though. The railroad doesn't much care what we have to say, and they own the land." Connor pointed to a cleared strip of forest where a stand of blue willows had been planted a year ago. "Those willows don't look like they're doing well," he said. "I told them it was a bad idea to plant there. Blue willows crave water, ponds, rivers, lakes." Mr. Burke shook his head. "But we were outnumbered. The train brings tourists, the blue willows bring hummingbirds, and everybody should be happy. Only it doesn't always work out that way." He gave a short laugh. "That's what they like to call progress." Another blast of hot wind came so strong I almost lost my balance. I dropped my notebook, and Mr. Burke knelt down and handed it to me. "Are you an artist, like Connor?" he asked. "No," I said, quickly returning the notebook to my waist pouch. I take notes on things. The woods, the animals, changes." I wondered if he'd scoff, but he merely nodded. "A scholar, then?" I didn't have the nerve to tell him I rarely attended school. A scholar I definitely was not. "Well, good for you. The world is changing. We're going to need scientists, inventors, people who look at everything in fresh ways. I visited the capital last month, whole town lit by gas lamps. It was a wonder to see, perchance, has some catching up to do." "We'll always need artists, too," I said, smiling at Connor. He looked at his feet the way I so often did. "Perhaps," said Mr. Burke, brows creased. "I just worry about the future. It's my job as a parent." We fell silent, gazing at the village as the sun shot crimson arrows through the trees. You know, Mr. Burke mused after a spell, Connor's mother used to do that, keep a notebook. I wasn't sure what to say. Connor had never mentioned his mother before. For her, it was birds, Mr. Burke continued. She drew them, studied them, counted them. That's probably where Connor got his artistic abilities. Does she still keep a notebook, I asked. She died of the red fever when Connor was 3. Oh, I didn't know. What did you say to people who'd lost someone they loved? What did people say to me? Nothing that ever changed anything. I'm sorry, I said, too softly and too late. Well, we should get going, said Mr. Burke. Good to meet you, Willodeen. I nodded to them both and started off. But a moment later, I heard Connor running after me. Is Quinby all right? He whispered. She's not eating, I said. That's why I'm out here. Thought I might find some peacock snails or red leaf beetles. I'm running out of ideas. I'll come by tomorrow to help. Couldn't today or yesterday. I had to repair a lot of those puzzlers. I'm sorry about that. He grinned. It was worth it, he said. He pointed toward a cluster of trees. If you're looking for peacock snails, there's that grove of blue willows I told you about. Just 5 of them, hidden away, but it might be worth a try. Go that way. He pointed to my left. And listen for a stream. I'll check it out. Connor crossed his fingers. I watched him lope down the hill to catch up with his father. As I headed into the trees, the high-pitched whistle of a steam engine carried on the wind, harsh and plaintive as a screecher's call. Chapter 27. That evening, I tried feeding Quinby some petals from the late-blooming silver pansy. She practically sneered. I gave her the pulverized wing of a spotted oak moth. No luck. I presented her with the 2 red-leaf beetles I'd managed to find under a decaying log. Nope. Finally, I placed a saucer of peacock snails in front of her. Quinby let out a screech of joy. She planted her 2 front feet in the saucer and gobbled down those snails so quickly I was afraid she'd choke. Duzu watched from his perch near Quinby's crate, cooing nervously at her table manners. Well, well, said Bertie, I think you found the magic recipe, Willodeen. The snails were the size of my thumbnail, and their swirling multicolored shells were soft to the touch. I'd managed to find 5 of them by digging, with great effort at the base of the blue willows Connor had told me about. It hadn't been easy. The snails liked to burrow deep beneath the tangled tree roots. My knuckles were bloodied, my fingernails black with soil. I sighed with satisfaction. It felt so good to have provided for Quinby. A memory came to me. My pa, watching the screecher and the babies, saying, She's just doing what she's meant to do, my girl. Caring for her own, best as she can, like all of us mas and pas. Still, I felt for the poor peacock snails. After all, they were living creatures, too. But that was the way of things, wasn't it? Didn't I eat hens, eggs, and river trout, and venison? I feel guilty about the snails, I admitted. They're so pretty, and they were minding their own business until I came along. Bertie, who was chopping onions, nodded. Nature's complicated that way. I know some folks who will only eat things that grow in the ground. She thought for a moment. Not sure where peacock snails would fit into that equation. Quinby's belly expanded like a coin purse filling with gold. The snails were so hard to get to, I said. You could try the blue willows down by the riverfront, said May, as her knitting needles clicked away. And there's that new grove, said Bertie, although those trees are still pretty young. Connor's father said those trees need more water, I said. You saw his father? Asked May. And Connor, I said, at the top of the ridge. There's talk of the railroad expanding. Ah, said May. Is that a good I asked, or a bad one? Neither, said May. Change is coming, certain as sunrise. The only question is how we will deal with it. I sat back, arms behind my head, watching Quinby lick her dish clean. What am I going to do with her? She can't stay here forever. She's a wild thing, unless, of course... Unless, said Bertie. I don't know. Unless she isn't real. Unless this magic is going to pass. Looks pretty real to me, said Bertie. May laughed. Certainly eats like she's real. I basked in the good-hearted smiles, as warming as the fire. Taking me in must have completely upended their lives, the same way taking in Quinby was complicating my life. Thank you, I murmured. For what? Bertie asked. For letting me be here, I said, and Duzu, and Quinby. Fiddle-faddle, said Bertie. I second her fiddle-faddle, said May. That night I settled into bed with Duzu and Quinby beside me. The more they both snored, it was like they were having a conversation. I smiled. I wished Connor could hear them. Closing my eyes, I wondered if sleep could play hide-and-seek with me tonight, as it so often did. I needn't have worried. The gentle snores of my two companions made for a perfect lullaby.